Hello again! In this video we will be returning invalid values to report errors. The concept is similar to the previous one. If an error occurs, we return an invalid value. If everything goes well, we return the actual value. Invalid values are values you would not expect to be returned by the function. For example, if we're measuring a distance, a negative value could be an invalid value. If we're measuring the temperature of a room, a value of 1000 degrees would hopefully be an invalid value. In the case of reading a file, if the file is missing, we are returning a string with the missing file value. This approach is very similar to the previous one. To begin with, it's very simple to implement and understand. The API does not need to change. Then, unlike the previous approach, we can distinguish between different kinds of errors. On the other hand, it serves a disadvantage with the previous approach. What if missing file is actually the contents of the file? As long as we can guarantee that the values we return when errors occur can never be valid, then this approach could work. Another issue with this approach is that since the same type is used for both the contents and the errors, we leave room for programming mistakes. For example, there's nothing stopping a typo in the equality comparison resulting in missing file being treated as a valid value. This can be quite a nasty bug to spot. Here's an example of how we can use invalid values to report errors. When no file is found, we return a string with the value missing file. Then in the caller, we check if the return value is equal to missing file, and if so, we handle the error. The approach is very simple and, as we discussed, allows us to distinguish between different kinds of errors. However, it is error prone since the same type is used for both the valid values and the errors. If we're not careful, we could end up treating an error as a valid value. For example, if we skipped an S in the right-hand side of the first comparison, we would end up treating missing file as a valid value and be in a lot of trouble. In this part, we looked at reporting errors using some sort of invalid value. An invalid value is a value that you would not expect to be normally returned by the function. This approach is simple to use and understand. It also allows us to distinguish between different errors. However, it is error prone since the same type is used for both the valid values and the errors.